Thank you. Yeah, it's
So it's going a different way.
yeah, it's hitting below Tampa now, going straight across the Florida line and back into Atlanta.
They're not gonna hit us at all.
What can hit us?
A hurricane, baby.
Why would it hit us?
I mean the aftermath.
What does that mean?
The rain.
Just be really rainy day.
No, I really think.
Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure a few people are going to be joining as we go. This is Alicia Baird. I am the treasurer for NAPS. You'll have to forgive my voice. I'm battling a head cold, so super fun. So I want to welcome everybody. This is the part one of our utility and UPT testing roundtable, and welcome and thank you to Andy Doak for standing in as our judge on this and joining us yet again. He did a fantastic job with the natural ability.
About the score.
Can everybody go ahead and mute just so we avoid some background noise? Anyways, Andy did a great job on our natural ability talk, and so of course we invited him back to kick us off with the utility training talk. So here we are. So just a couple of housekeeping things. I don't know, I am sharing a screen on a PowerPoint screen, so you know, if you're on a device where you could see my screen, great. If not, it's not that big a deal. You can in Zoom, it looks like everybody's pretty much given themselves a name, so we know who's chatting and you know, that kind of thing. But if you don't, you can assign. I am not good with Zoom, but you can assign yourself a name. I think it's under the control panel somewhere. Anyways, also please open up the chat. I will, let's see, I've got this here. So there's a little chat bubble in your little control bar. Open up the chat. We've got a lot of people joining tonight, so that'll be a really good place to ask questions. And Brayton or Matt or one of the board members, if you guys will monitor that, and at some point we'll stop periodically and kind of go through the questions as we get them. There is also a place to, I think it's under this more button. The presenter doesn't have it, I think, but there is a place to raise your hand. So if you want to speak, we would appreciate it if you go ahead and do the little hand raise, and then I'll see a little icon and can I will know who is asking to speak, and then we'll give you the floor and unmute and everything. If there does get to be too much background noise, I will mute people that aren't talking, that are just have background noise. So please don't be offended if I mute you. And also, yeah, please, oh, typo, please keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking. So, yeah, that's basically it for housekeeping. So what we're gonna do, and we've been putting this out on Facebook, and Brayton's done a great job with the graphics, but we're gonna change it up a little bit. In talking to the 4 judges that we have speaking, we decided to try to do this in a format in which we talk about it in the order that most people would choose to train for it. So tonight is going to be kind of an overall introduction, and we will cover some of the quote unquote easier areas like the duck drag and the heel, but mostly this is kind of an overall discussion about the test and what to expect. And then in part 2, we're going to be looking at force fetch. Part 3, we're going to be looking at moving from the force fetch and using that in the duck search. And then in part 4, we're going to be working on the steadiness in the field and steadiness by the blind. So that's kind of how we're going to format that. And that way, you know, the hope is that everybody can take away from this a little bit of homework to be able to go and work with their dog. And we understand it is 2 months in between, but, you know, go work with your dog, and we'll have a, you know, we'll be available to ask questions, and you know, we're going to try to start some kind of conversation, or maybe Facebook group or something for the group that participates in this, so that we can all share feedback and ask questions and do that kind of thing as well. But we're still kind of working on that. Okay, so I'm sorry, guys. So yeah, I just went through format and progression. So tonight we're going to talk about the introduction and the breakdown of the test areas, resources to help you with training, what order to train in and why, maybe some things that you can work on over the next couple of months to start working towards your utility test. And like I said, the discussion of some of the quote unquote easier areas of the test, like healing and the drag. And then, as I already said, part 2, force fetch or trained hold, part 3, duck search, part 4, steadiness in the field and by the blind. At this time, we don't have a specific judge assigned to any of the last 3 parts. We're still working through that, but the judges that we should have as guest speakers will be Larry Stone, who is a senior judge from the Central Oregon chapter, Herb Christian, who is a senior and invitational judge from the Buckeye chapter, and Roy Ames, who helped me out. Somebody, what chapter is Roy from?
He's a senior judge from the Northern Illinois.
Perfect, thank you. So those will be our judges that are helping us out, in addition to Andy tonight. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and join somebody. I'm going to go ahead and kind of turn it over to Andy, if that's okay. And what I was thinking is that we could just kind of go through a discussion of all the different areas of the test, and then maybe, you know, how the test is scored, what areas are more important from a judging perspective, and what you need to get like a prize 1, prize 2. And then maybe talk about the judges' scorecard a bit, and then go into the healing and the drag, and then we can talk about some training resources and ask any questions and just kind of do some general overall questions. We don't want to get too in depth in any of the areas that we will be talking about in the future tonight, but just, you know, if anybody has any questions, we'll just kind of do it that way. And really, Andy, feel free to take it in a different direction if you like, or, you know, whatever you want to do tonight. You're kind of our expert on this, and I'm gonna try to be a little bit more quiet so that my
throat is not killing me. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Alicia. And thanks to everybody, you know, within NAPS for having me on. I really appreciate it. I had a good time last time chatting with you all. And, you know, actually had a chance to, Amanda and I had a chance to meet Jeff and Alicia in person at the Invitational in New Mexico. We had some good conversations just in general, talked a little bit about, you know, this presentation for utility and what might be beneficial to you all. So I'm glad to be here, glad I can help you guys in any way. So yeah, we'll go through a few things, you know, here and there. I also do think that it's a really good thing that you guys are going to hear from different judges, hear some different perspectives about the areas that they're going to talk about. So, you know, with this being a multiple part series, I would encourage you to really absorb everything you can and attend each one of those series, because I think it'll help you overall. And Alicia mentioned the Aims and Rules Clinic. If you haven't been to one, I strongly encourage that you attend one, because this, what we're trying to do here, it kind of looks like a really small version of all the information you might get in an Aims and Rules Clinic. So if you can attend one of those, or if I've attended multiple in the time that I've been in NAVHDA, and they're just a real fun weekend to attend if you can partake in one. So so first we'll kind of talk about the areas of the utility test. It's important to remember or understand really what the utility test is. And I'm sure there's folks on here that have run multiple dogs and utility tests over the years, or maybe there's some folks here that have not run a utility test or have an NA dog that they're working for to try and get them to run in utility. The biggest difference, in my opinion, in the natural ability test versus the utility test is natural ability test. From again, my opinion is it's really what the dog might be capable of at the natural ability level, because the dog is a young dog, it hasn't matured yet. Certainly, it's an indication of the skill set that dog may have both in the field and the water. But as the dog matures, usually you see that personality, the capabilities of that dog develop beyond that 16-month age period of the natural ability test. And the utility test is really when you've run a dog through utility, when you've trained a dog through utility, when you've seen some things that the dog is capable of through utility training, or maybe some things that are difficult as you work through utility training, you really get an understanding of what that dog is capable of when you're training for the utility test. It's much more all-encompassing type of test for both field and water, and multiple game species are obviously involved on infield and water with the utility test as well too. So it's a really good indication of what you may have for a really quality hunting dog. That's the way that I see the utility test. People also will describe the utility test, a dog that can train for and get a high prize in the utility test, as if the dog is biddable, meaning can it handle training? Can it handle difficult situations? You know, we're going to talk a little bit about the drag a little bit later tonight. It's one portion of the test, but it's in the test for a reason. You know, can the dog be still cooperative when it's out of the sight of the handler? And all that is related to biddability, for you to be able to take a dog and put them through difficult situations, completely different type of situations as well too. We probably won't get into the duck search too much on this, but the biggest thing, the biggest thing in my opinion in the utility test is the duck search versus the field portions of the test. Because in the duck search, we're expecting that dog to work hard in the water, away from its handler, be totally independent, search out, find game in the water. If it finds a game, has to track it down and retrieve it. Hold on just one second. I was wondering when the dogs would start barking, but there we go. So anyway, so the dog is expected to be really independent in the duck search, but then once the dog runs in the field portion, we expect it to do the total opposite. And we expect it to be steady. We expect it to point game. We expect it to be cooperative with the handler when it's near the handler or away from the handler. So that to my opinion, and to a lot of opinions that you'll probably hear from people who've been around in NAVHDA, that is really what separates, you know, the good dogs from the dogs that perform poorly in the utility level. Can it handle opposite ends of the spectrum of what we're asking the dog to do? Be very independent in one area and then be very cooperative in another area. And that's the difference between the field and the water. That's what makes the utility test really different from any other test, even at the invitational. The invitational, you hear people say that it's a primarily an obedience test, which I would agree with. You know, we put a lot of obedience type tasks on the dogs, the invitational, not so much that independence that's found in that duck search. So on the screen there, Alicia obviously has the water group and the field group, the two groups that we look for. All those criteria are areas that we look at from a judge that are evaluated in each of those areas. So duck search, walking at heel is part of the blind sequence, remain by blind, steadiness by blind, retrieve of duck obviously is the end result of the dog being sent from the blind at the water. In the field group, we judge the dog's search, the dog's pointing capability, steadiness on game, meaning the birds that the dog actually pointed, and retrieve of shot bird. It's really important, I'll touch on this just a little bit, to remember it's retrieve of shot bird. So there are times in the utility test where you might see a utility dog hasn't found birds in the field, and the gunners actually don't have a chance to shoot a bird. We need to see the dog, how it reacts to a shot bird. That's a very big difference for some dogs when they just pick up live game. You know, maybe they've taken out a bird and they scoop it up and they're retrieving it back to the handler. Very big difference when the bird is actually shot. You know, maybe there's some blood on the bird, or the bird's been opened up a little bit, close shot or something like that. The dog can retrieve very, very differently on a shot bird. And ultimately that's what we're after as hunters. So that's why it specifically mentions shot bird. We don't really judge birds that are not shot. Sure that it's a cooperative act for a dog to bring back a bird that it's, you know, scooped up by accident or purposely. But in order for us to actually judge the utility dog, we need to have a bird that is shot. And then retrieve by drag, obviously we'll be talking about that a little bit more. And then the following criteria at the bottom, those are all areas that we judge throughout the entire test. And we'll get into that a little bit more. I'm really glad that Alicia and Brayton actually took some images directly out of the Ames book that looks like we'll see later on. Speaking of the Ames book, you'll probably hear a lot of judges say that the Ames book is the end all be all reference of how the test is set up. The criteria that we look at. It doesn't cover in-depth details to some degree about how we judge certain areas, but it definitely covers the higher level areas that we look for, the scorecards, you know, a variety of things. So the Ames book, I still to this day carry an Ames book with me when I'm judging, because there are times when we see kind of odd situations that we don't see often, and we got to make sure that we have the right score. We're looking at things correctly. So a good judge will actually from time to time reference that Ames book and make sure that, again, what we're looking at, what we're giving a score for the dog is a fair score, and it's a correct score based on the Ames book. And that information is available to you all. It's available on the NAVHDA website. You can receive a paper copy from the office if you'd like to request a paper copy. It doesn't cost that much. I usually always have a paper copy, and I always have an electronic copy right on my phone at all times, so I can go back and reference that at any given time. So I'd really encourage you guys to read that. If you haven't already, read it, you know, page by page, if you're really interested in the utility test, because I do think it will help you out greatly to understand that. So I think that covers that. If you want to keep going, Alicia, to the next slide. So here again, this kind of describes the overall scoring and prize level for the utility test. So those criteria on the left-hand side are, again, what we are evaluating as judges: the water, the field, and the areas that are judged throughout. The number index, that's basically a multiplier. When we give a dog, for example, search for the duck, if we were to actually score the overall duck search as a 4, we then multiply that 4 by 4, the index number, to the actual points in that area, you know, are 16, right? The field portion, for example, the search is index number of 5. So if we were to give a dog a 4 in the field for his actual score, or his or her actual score, we would multiply that 4 by 5 and get the 20. So the maximal points attainable, again, add up to 204 based on all those criteria. The index number is really an indication of how NAVHDA views the importance of that criteria. If you look, the most important criteria for the most points you can gain in the utility test is use of nose. So I firmly agree with that, because a dog uses every ounce of its being by using its nose, particularly as a hunting dog. So that's why that criteria is ranked higher, particularly desire to work. And if you look at the indexes too, search for the duck and field search are obviously ranked very high as well. The prize qualification, if you look there, again, they're giving you that index number. The number in parentheses. Take, for example, prize 1 under search for the duck. You have a 4, right? Times 4 would be 16. The 4 is the minimum score you need to receive in the duck search to be a qualifying prize 1. So all those numbers in parentheses right there are the minimum scores in those categories that you need to achieve a prize 1. Now, most of us have all been there when we read the scores, at the end of the evening, and we hear, search for the duck 4, walking a heel 4, remain by blind 4, steadiness by blind 2, right? Well, if you look, steadiness by blind 2 is actually a prize 2 qualifying score. So in that category, that would drop the dog down because of that score of a 2 in steadiness by blind. So if you as a handler are really focused on your training, Alicia alluded to the fact that the judges that she spoke to, and again, Jeff and I and Alicia and Amanda all spoke at the invitation about this. What's the importance for you as a trainer if you want to be successful as much as possible in the utility test? If that's what your heart desires, you should be aware of the areas that are impacted the most in the utility test. If you look at the scorecard or this category here, search for the duck, you need a 4. Pointing, you need a 4. Use of nose, you need a 4, and desire to work, you need a 4. And this is, of course, for prize 1 qualifying dog. Everything else you can get a 3 in and still be in prize 1 criteria. So if it were me, Amanda and I used to not train like this, but we sort of changed our training methods probably about 5, 6, 7 years ago to really focus on some of these areas that you need the dog to be very proficient at first. So if Amanda and I are training dogs and we're moving from a natural ability dog to utility dog, in that time frame when we are going from natural ability to utility, we will have completed our force fetch process. We like to complete that process before we actually do real serious utility work. So again, from the time period when the age of the dog, when we've done our NA test, maybe we got a hunting season or 2 under the dog's belt, the dog has, more importantly, a love for birds and waterfowl. That is really important before you start your force fetch process, to make sure that dog really understands that game birds are a good thing. And then start your force fetch process. Once that's done, if we're timing it from a training perspective, we usually roll right into the springtime. And the number one thing that we start training utility dog for is that duck search, nothing else. There are trainers out there who, sure, they blend certain things here and there, but we like to get our duck search done and the dog just going bonkers, multiple resends, bringing back ducks to us all the time, making that very consistent before we move to some of the other criteria, before we particularly move to the field areas. But once we're confident that our dogs are doing proficient duck searches, then we'll start doing our field work. And then in the middle of all that, we can start moving into some things that are sort of can be filtered into your training program at any stage of the utility test. And that would be the retrieve of drag and the healing. We're usually training healing all the way through. Actually, the field portions, we're training healing in the field. We're training healing when we come up to the line of the duck drag. We're training healing, when we get dogs out of the truck. We're training healing when we are doing steady by the blind. So there's all kinds of opportunities where you can train for healing, which makes when you actually are doing your healing phase in the remain by blind, steadiness by blind, makes it much easier. So in a higher level, that's kind of what my preference, what Amanda's preference is as far as an order of our training program. It really kind of does match some of the hierarchy here of the utility test as far as what things are valued the highest or lowest. So I think we can probably go to the next slide, Alicia. So here's the judges scorecard. I know it's kind of hard to see. I'm going to move myself up here. There we go. If we could zoom in. So again, if you attend an Ames clinic, you will go through these scorecards for natural ability, UPT, and utility in very, very detail. And you will actually act as an apprentice judge and fill out these scorecards. So starting with the utility test, when you enter your dog in any NAVHDA test, we have the call name, the chapter that you're entering the test in, the date of the test, the dog's name, the age, breed, owner, handler, the registered number. All that information is input by the test secretary. And that's the actual information that when your scorecards go back to the office for record keeping, the folks in the office will look at that and enter your data. Physical attributes, those are judged when your dog has actually finished the water portion. The reason for that particularly is when we look at coat, it gives a real indication of the dog's coat as far as density and harshness. It's much more obvious when the dog is wet than when it's dry. And then we also look at the eyes, entropic, ectropic, other issues. If it's a male, we'll check for the testes, and basically the test there is we make sure that there's two there. It's not monoarchid, it only has one. X-rays, what we ask there is if a judge asks you, has your dog been X-rayed before? What we're asking is, has your dog been either pen hipped or OFA'd to check for the tightness of the hips? If you say yes, then the next question the judge is going to ask you is, have you turned them into the NAVHDA office? So basically, are your X-rays in the NAVHDA office? If you say yes to all those, we'll just check that yes, the dog has been X-rayed. Bite and teeth, we look for a butt bite, an overbite, undershot. If it has any missing teeth, any extra teeth, all this information is really important information for you as an owner, maybe for health issues or things to be aware of. It's also very important from a breeding perspective to look at those certain things and understand what breeders may want to focus on or be aware of. We also look for temperament. So in the bottom of the scorecard, there's temperament, normal, sensitive, and shy. So a normal temperament would be, we're checking the physical attributes. The dog doesn't react in any way, lets us check its teeth, that sort of thing. Sensitive we actually do more commonly, we judge temperament at the water when we're checking the physical attributes. But if you had a dog, it's very, very rare for this to occur nowadays. If you had a dog that was really, really sensitive to just people or noises or anything like that, doesn't happen really very rarely in utility level dogs. But if a dog just reacts to people or situations very sensitively, then we may mark sensitive, and we're also going to put a comment in the scorecard as to why. Same thing with shy. If it recovers slow, let's say, again, this is uncommon for a utility dog, but let's say for some reason you were going to run your utility dog and we checked the teeth and the dog just didn't like people in its mouth and decided to run for the truck and said, nope, I'm not going to be involved with that. That's something we might say, okay, the dog didn't recover. But if we brought the dog back, we tried to check its teeth again and it allowed us to, we may judge that as sensitive. But when we do judge anything that does not have a normal temperament, we typically put a comment there on the bottom as to why that's taking place. So that's the right-hand side. The left-hand side is actually the meat and potatoes, where we're actually putting our scores on the back of the card. I don't think the Ames book shows the back of the card, but there's all kinds of note sections that we have an opportunity to put in for judging in these certain areas. So the scorecard kind of works. It looks very odd when you first look at it, but we actually understand how it works. It actually works very well. If you look at the very top, search for the duck, the point system there, 4, 3, 2. Those are actually the prize 1, prize 2, and the prize 3 categories, minimum score you need to get in the search for the duck. It has nothing to do with your actual score. It's just an indicator for you, like I was explaining back on the slide previous. So that if you went down from the left to the right, search for the duck, walk at heel is a 3, remain by blind is 3, steadiness by blind is a 3, and so on. Those are the minimum scores you need to get your actual final score in that category to receive a prize 1. Subsequently, the middle column is a prize 2, and the right-hand column is a prize 3. Now, take for example, if you received a search for the duck 1, that was your final score in the duck search of a 1, you would receive no prize because you didn't meet a minimum category in that area in one particular venue. When you don't meet a minimum category in any of the venues, then you will not receive a prize. So again, going down on that left-hand side, you know, that is why the duck search if you really want, you know, to be successful, if you're looking for that prize 1 dog, if that's something you desire, looking at those key areas that are really important from a utility test perspective is important to incorporate into your training platform. That's why Man and we really prioritize some of that. And then it also relates to a large degree in a hunting aspect. I will say we've used the duck search a handful of times for down ducks that just got away, and you know, they were wounded, and you send them on a duck search, and it is really awesome to see in a hunting scenario a dog actually use a duck search. It's pretty impressive. The criteria that are on the top left, you have nose, desire, stamina, cooperation, obedience. Those are the categories that are judged throughout. So the way this scorecard works is any block on the scorecard that has basically a white mark, you look at the bottom right, it says primary. So those are the ones that are weighted the most. So if you look at the search for the duck, we judge nose, desire, stamina, cooperation, obedience. We judge all of that in the duck search. You know, stamina is an obvious one. There's the dog, is he physically capable of doing it? Cooperation, you know, maybe if the dog finds a duck, is it going to actually bring it back? Obedience, is the dog going to go out and do what you asked it to do? You know, desire, does the dog have a desire to do the duck search? And nose, obviously, nose can be judged a lot during duck search. If a dog cuts across a duck track or actually scents a duck downwind, we can judge that use of nose just like in the field. It's just that the dog is in a different medium that it's doing its work in. So we have all those scores on that left-hand side, those blocks that are empty. Some of them are secondaries and are important, but they're not valued as high as the primaries. And then the 4 on the bottom, what'll happen is when we judge, we'll give you 1 through 4. And again, going back to the search for the duck at the top, we'll give you a nose score. We'll give you a desire score, again, 1 through 4, a stamina score, cooperation, obedience. The numbers of that will translate into an overall duck search score. So it's not a numerical summary or average of those scores, but that paints the picture of what that dog did. And your overall duck search score will end up being 1 number. Of course, every category is 1 number. When we tally the entire scorecard, at the very bottom, we have the nose, desire to work, stamina, cooperation, obedience, and they're kind of in like an angular line. Those are the very bottom 5 criteria. What we're doing there, yep, Felicia's got her cursor on it. We're actually going vertically up to summarize what you scored. So let's take, for example, use of nose. Use of nose is judged in the duck search. It's judged in the retrieve of duck as a where applicable. Nose is obviously judged in the field search. It's judged in the pointing. Nose, if you look, is not at all part of steadiness. The dog does not use its nose to be steady. It uses obedience and particularly on the flush, cooperation. So we do not judge nose on the field steadiness. Again, retrieve by drag, where applicable. That might be a scenario where the dog goes into where the duck was placed on the drag downwind. Retrieve a shot bird, there's where applicable. So again, a dog may not have seen that down bird and wins it to find that bird. Good use of nose for retrieve a shot bird. So working up that column is actually what we give you an overall nose score for, a nose score for the day. Same thing with desire to work. We're going to work up the scorecard and get that desire score. So there's a lot of criteria where you're judged individually in the utility test. And then again, a summary of all the main categories: nose, desire, stamina, cooperation, obedience. That is an overall picture in those categories of what your dog did for the day. And again, that's probably going kind of fast through the scorecard. I can't explain it in depth as much as if you attended a Aims and Rules clinic. You would have much more of a sense and a comfort level about the scorecard, and again, I would encourage you to attend one of those clinics to really get a sense of how to use the scorecard itself. So let's see. Yeah. So
Andy, just
Sure.
to stop you here quick, do you want to talk about training resources, or do you want to go into the drag and the healing a little bit and just talk about those? Which, I mean, you can go either direction as far as I'm concerned. I just don't know. Or we could stop and ask questions if anybody has questions at the moment.
Let's do this. Let's try and get through the drag and the heal a little bit, and then we could probably go back to the training resources, and I'm sure folks have questions. And again, as Alicia alluded to, feel free to pop the questions there in the chat. If you have any, we're kind of going fast a little bit through here, and again, this is an overall high level introduction to the utility test. So don't be bashful if you have questions. For sure. So we will get into the retrieve by drag, which if you look on the scoring system slide that Alicia has, it's part of the field component. You need a minimum of a 3 in drag for prize 1. A 2 would be a prize 2 qualification, and a 1 would be a prize 3. A 0 in the drag would be a no prize for the drag, and you would receive a no prize overall for the test, even if you aced the remaining portions of the test. So retrieve by drag is an important part of the test. The retrieve by drag, basically the setup, and again, the setup is listed in the Ames book. It's very descriptive. The retrieve by drag is a dispatched dead duck is typically used for the drag. What will happen is the judges will determine the starting point of the drag. They'll pull a bunch of feathers from the duck. They'll put it on the ground, and a judge will actually walk about 100 to 200 yards. Typically, it's somewhere in that range. Usually, it's more closer to 100 yards. Somewhere in the drag, usually about in the center or the last 3/4 of the area, there'll be a slight turn in the drag, and then the judge will go out of sight. More commonly, I would say in the East Coast and the Midwest, you will find that chapters have use of like a tree line where that duck gets dragged to the tree line. The duck will be put maybe 5, 10, 15 yards in the woods. The duck will be placed in the woods, and then the judge will continue to walk in the woods out of sight and hide, so he or she can observe the duck or the dog when it encounters the duck and what it's going to do. Then the handler will be asked to bring the dog up the line. They'll be shown the pile of feathers. It's important to remember, particularly in the drag, that once you release your dog on that drag, you're welcome to give a fetch command or whatever it is that you'd like to say or do to tell your dog to go find that duck. Once you do that, though, any subsequent commands that you're given, that you give the dog after that, will likely impact your score. That includes when your dog maybe comes out of the woods with a duck, and even if you say good girl, good boy, particularly for the drag, we want to see the handlers release the dog, and the dog goes out in a manner, comes back, brings the duck back to the handler. We do need to see, for the best scoring dogs, we want to see presentation of the game. Presentation could be that the dog comes straight to you. It could come to your side. basically a brief pause and presents that game to you being cooperative. If you don't have presentation of the game, that likely impacts your score as well. And these are all reasons why, we've really touched on the force fetch process. It's really, if you really want to have a dog that is a reliable retrieving dog, not just a utility dog, but a dog that's reliable retriever, brings game right to you, brings it to hand. You really need to have that force fetch down. I think Amanda was pointing at a question, I think, right? If we talk about best practices and training for the drag and heel, that would be good too. How to start the training process for the drag. Sure. So in our, in Amanda's training program for the drag, again, our force fetch process should be done by when we first start. One of the reasons why is I, as a trainer, I don't want to be showing my dog a task, but also trying to work through a retrieving issue that I could fix prior to that in the force fetch process. So by the time we're going to start doing drags, I want to know that the dog has no problem going to find and pick up ducks. You have an opportunity when you're coming up to the drag to work on healing, right? You can heal your dog right to the drag. That healing, we like to heal our dogs really to each venue to practice that healing, that'll help you when you're actually going down for your remain by blind sequence through the healing stakes. So you have an opportunity to train for healing directly through your coming to the line for your drag. Usually we try and train our dogs for short drags first. We'll maybe do like a 15 or 20 yard drag short, into the woods. If the dog is going to go down and use its nose and find that duck and bring that drag back in the training process, that's a positive thing. So we're going to reward with some praise there, in the training process. But again, remember that if you're doing that in the test, it may impact you. So there's a kind of a transition period where, if you're doing consistent drags, you're going to back off probably that praise. And again, that force fetch process should be done. So the dog goes out, finds the duck, brings it back.
We force fetched it on dead ducks.
But part of that process in the force fetch world is also force fetching the dog on dead ducks, right? A lot of people think that by force fetching their dogs on bumpers, even bumpers with wings on them, or dokins, or just chucker, or maybe just pigeons, and you've gotten that far and you haven't trained your dog with force fetch on dead ducks, you're really missing a key element there, because some dogs are great. Some dogs will just say, yeah, it's game, I'm going to pick it up. But other dogs, more often than not, they react differently to different game. Amanda and I also force fetch our dogs on live ducks, live chucker, live pigeon, all of that, because the reality is we, at some point in your dog's training program, at some point when you're hunting with your dog, at some point during and you have the test, your dog is going to encounter game that is either partially dead and still moving, or in case of the duck search, your dog may very well encounter a live, very active, very mobile duck. So just something to keep in mind, if you're not incorporating live bird force fetch into your training program, you may see that as an issue. It's typically not. You could, desire can overcome a lot of that, but how a dog handles live game is really important, and that's why we incorporate it into the training portion. I think maybe we'll take a couple questions here, Alicia, because I know Brayton raised his hand, and then I think a couple questions are coming through the chat. So why don't we do that, if that makes sense?
Sure. Brayton, go ahead, and then we'll address the questions in the chat.
So like you've explained, especially for new people in here, in my training, this is my first hunting dog. Obviously, I kind of bounced all over the place. I was working on duck search, and I didn't start force fetching my dog until she was 3 years old. And that's whenever a problem started after we force fetched. As soon as she would come out of the water from duck search, or even doing a duck search on land, as soon as she would make eye contact with me, she would stop and spit the bird out.
Yep.
And I have gotten to a point where I've tried multiple different things to change up what I'm doing. And I've realized if I crouch down, that she will bring them to me. But if I'm standing up, as soon as she makes eye contact, she stops and spits the bird out. Doesn't matter if it's a chucker or quail in the field or a duck at the water. What is there any other approach to that other than just consistently doing retrieves and slowly going from a crouch to standing up? You know, what kind of potentially caused that issue?
Well, the couple questions I have for you on that. What comes to mind immediately is somewhere in the training portion of your force fetch, you may not have worked through what I call, or what a lot of trainers call, hold and carry. So if a dog is spitting out game, whether it's live or dead game, that usually relates to hold and carry. So hold and carry is, will a dog, walk around in a training scenario, whether it's on the table or, you're trying to get that dog maybe to just do short retrieves across your lawn. Is there ever a point where it is going to spit that game out? Right. And so in our force fetch process, SAR, man and I's, before we're even providing real force to go get something, whether it's, ear pinch or your method or whatever it is, before we even do that, we focus really diligently. The force fetch, in our opinion, is a foundation of a good, reliable retrieving dog. Within the force fetch process, the foundation of the force fetch process is hold and carry. So will your dog hold, just if you place a dead, or it's the bumper or doken or whatever it is, you worked your way up to dead birds and live birds, will it hold that item in its mouth, not spit it out? And you can walk at heel with the dog, you can walk all around, it is not going to spit it out. You can run, you can bring it up on the table, jump over things, do all kinds of things. Because if you think about it, a hunting dog with a bird in its mouth is going to bash into things, right? It's going to hit obstacles through the woods or the field, or maybe it stumbles, or maybe it doesn't have a good grip on that bird. So my thought is that maybe there's a hold and carry issue there. We're going back. And again, the question I'd have for you, Braden, is if you've done hold and carry with all the types of game that the dog is going to encounter. I can't remember at the beginning if you said this was a dog that was going out on a duck search and was actually bringing a live duck or a dead duck back. Was it one of the two, or?
Well, yeah, the problem started with fresh kill or partially live. And I mean, this dog's had 2 duck seasons under, but that issue did not start until after force fetching.
Mm-hmm.
So I clearly did something wrong in my force fetch that created this habit.
Well, it sounds like, again, like it's uncomfortable when we're trying to, first of all, I commend you for having multiple duck hunting seasons under the dog, because that's also critical too. Before you start the force fetch process, the dog really needs to have a love for the game that we're going to go after, to know that that's fun, right? So if you went back to the force fetch process and all of a sudden you're trying to put, maybe a live duck that has maybe one wing taped and one wing can move, that's an odd thing for that dog to handle, right? So that's where, with the live stuff, we might start with a duck that has both wings taped, right? So it's not moving, just its neck can move. So the dog can go out and grab that. And then again, if it spits it, you got to be ready to put the duck back right in its mouth. And not in our opinion, not in an aggressive way. I try not in my force fetch process. You know, if you were a kid and I try to draw an analogy always to, like, you know, when we were all younger kids, if your parents told you to eat your dinner and it was, you know, broccoli or cauliflower, and they just shove the food in your mouth every night, eventually you're not going to like that, right? So there's a way to place a duck in a dog's mouth so that, you know, you're not trying to do it in an overly aggressive way where it just turns that dog off. But I would probably suggest going back to, you know, that force fetch process with hold and carry, dead ducks and live ducks. Got to get that down, because if again, a dog that's spitting birds out wherever it is.
When she spits it out.
Yeah, that's a good question. Amanda just asked, what do you do? I think you mentioned crouching down, right? Because
But like when she drops it, what do you do?
So I've spent half the summer. I've tried various different things to figure out what works and what hasn't. And which through my force fetch, I started out with the ear pinch and then I overlaid with the e-collar.
yep.
And I've tried to apply light pressure, but I've been hesitant on really doing a whole lot of pressure on live or fresh killed birds, because I don't want to associate that correction with something that she enjoys going to pick up.
Yep. Yeah, that's the hard part of the balance of the force fetch, that a trainer needs to either, you know, get some help and somebody in person, right? Because it's different from you describing it to us, you know, on the call here and saying, but the real determination is going to be, how can we look at your dog physically and how it reacts in those type of situations to suggest something that may work. Now, I will say that, you know, if you can draw an analogy to, you know, when you first probably started placing bumpers in your dog's mouth, right? There's a lot of dogs that just, what is this thing in my mouth? I don't like it. And they spit it out, right? And then you work through the force fetch process, the hold and carry. Then eventually you're doing that ear pinch and the pressure with the e-collar, like we talked about. It's very similar. I treat it no differently than the bumpers or the dokits, right? Usually the dog will come to the point where they say, okay, I get this. Repetition tells me that I can't spit these dead ducks or live ducks or dead chucker or live chucker out. But when you take that dog and it goes into the field in its element, usually it all comes back to them, right? There's sort of an ebb and flow in the whole force fetch process, an up and down, where, you know, you're getting somewhere, then you might go back a little bit, then it's, you know, it's hard to say where you may need to push through that or where you're not without actually observing your dog in person, you know.
And then one thing I will just add is, so we break our force fetch up into 3 parts. The first one is hold and carry. We're not asking the dog to reach for it. We're not pinching with the ear pinch. We're just placing the object into the dog's mouth, and we quickly get the dog moving, like running down the table. If she spits it, let her spit it. And the first thing that we do is we just grab her muzzle and we just lightly pinch, just grab the top of her muzzle, and, you know, we're put a little bit of pressure on her tooth and her lip, just a little bit, and say, you know, as soon as she drops it, no. And then you pick up the object and put it back in her mouth, good girl, and then get her moving again. You might try something like that, just going back to the table, not in a hunting situation, not in a field work situation or around your duck search. I would just bring her back to your table and just try just the hold and carry part. So make it as black and white as possible. So if she does drop it, you're just gonna, you know, grab the top of her mouth, just place it in, and then just get her going, and like use a lot of praise. Especially with poodle pointers. Andy has force fetched a couple of setters now. They do really well with a lot of praise. So when she's doing it great, praise her, get her moving, I find, well, this method does use a lot of like running up and down the table. So the running action gets them used to moving with it in their mouth. And then we don't let them, once they get, so they're, carrying it, not dropping it anymore, then we can practice that little swing to heel, and then they can present it, and then we can say out or drop. But I would, if it were my dog, I would go back to the hold and carry and just go back through your bumpers, go back through your dead chuckers, dead ducks, and then live chucker, live ducks.
Yep, that's kind of what I was getting at, Brayton.
And don't
what you-
ear pinch, don't e-fetch, just do the hold and carry part and see if that cleans it up.
Yep.
Okay, well, I appreciate it, and I'll let somebody else ask their next question.
I think there's a couple more in the chat, Alicia. There's a question from.
Yeah, we got Mike. Is it possible to overtrain for dragged game? My dog completed 25 consecutive drag drills perfectly over 6 months leading up to UT. The week before the test, she shut down on this segment, flat out wouldn't complete the segment. Training was all low key, very little pressure.
Okay. So the way I would answer that is yes, it's possible to overtrain for not only the drag, but it's possible to overtrain for any portion of the test. So the drag is really inserted into the NAVHDA test to actually show if a dog is going to actually shut down. Very commonly, it will shut down on the drag. The reason being is because we're expecting the dog to go out, find a bird, go away from the handler. That is the key. The dog is away from the handler. So there's no influence from the handler. It's just sent to go pick up a dead duck. So sometimes what we see on the drag is dogs, and I know you're saying it's very low key pressure, but usually maybe this was a force fetch problem. Maybe this was sort of just popped up, and the dog enjoyed doing it the number of times it did, and then it just said, I think I'm just gonna pass now on this. And maybe that was a force fetch problem, or even though low pressure was applied through some of the training areas, maybe the combination of training, because it is a lot of stuff to throw at a dog in the utility test. And again, a lot of different criteria, the duck search being completely opposite from the field, right? Usually us as trainers, what do? I will admit that I've done this before. We try and leading up to that test, right? We try and fine tune everything and maybe naturally just put a little bit more pressure on our dogs. And then somewhere that pressure kind of pops out somewhere else where the dog doesn't want to do one portion of the test. Pretty commonly, it can be done on the drag. We see dogs that they go in the woods, they're out of the handler side of the handler, burying the duck, digging a hole, just not going down the drag at all, just kind of wandering off. We see dogs that sometimes will pull feathers off a duck. We'll see dogs that will actually eat the duck whole. We'll see dogs that will urinate on the duck. All those things are signs of, hey, not sure I like doing this anymore, and I'm going to take advantage of this situation because my handler is not near me, and I'm going to do what I want with this game. So that is a big reason why the drag is in place. It's hard to say. It's hard to answer that question, Mike, without knowing kind of what you've done in the force fetch process, or some of the other things you've done in your other training stuff, because it's all intertwined very heavily. And sometimes I know judges that have gone into tests very confidently as well. Their dogs have been doing well all summer, and all of a sudden they get to the test, and even I know multiple judges where their dogs have actually decided they're going to take advantage of the drag and eat the duck. It's a little bit of, humble pie, particularly if you're a judge, to see that. You kind of scratch your head and say, what did I do? Or what What did I incorporate into the training platform that maybe caused this? Or what didn't I? What did I leave out? Did I leave something out in the force fetch process where, you know, the dog thought it was great every time, but now it's test day, and, you know, different stresses are added to the dog on test day. We add different stresses to ourselves. We all get nervous as handlers, including myself and judges as well. So there's a lot of factors in that, but, you know, you're right. It is possible to overtrain. And that's where you hear a lot of judges talk about they want their dog to really peak leading up to that test, and peaking might mean, you know, backing off a little bit, right? That's a hard thing to do, because us as individuals, you know, we want to see the dog doing everything a lot of the time, repetitively over and over, and that gives us confidence with going into the test. But sometimes we have to analyze what's going on with the dog, maybe back off a portion. You know, if your duck searches are going well, you know, maybe you're not doing as many duck searches before the test, or, you know, your field is going well, and, you know, maybe you back off your field a little bit. You know, it's a utility test. Again, it's a unique animal because it's a balance of everything. It's more of a balance than any other test there is in the NAVHDA system. So,
was he able to get her going on him again, or?
yeah, that's a good question. Were you able, Mike, if you want to just jump in the chat again, were you able to,
Or you can unmute, or
were you able to get your dog back doing drags? Yeah, Mike's still on.
she went on the third send.
Third send. Okay, so at the utility test, it took multiple sends on the utility test. Yeah. Gotcha.
So you had this with Annie, your first send.
Yeah, I mean, I did have a couple, you know, my first setter that I trained, you know, we kind of ebbed and flowed a little bit in the drag. The drag was not probably her strongest suit, you know, and we kind of had to keep pushing at it. One thing that I will say, there's going to be trainers that disagree with me. I know that there's some really good trainers in NAVHDA that would agree with me. If you get a dog that's turned off by the drag, sometimes I will fire a shot actually leading up to the drag, just a shot. And that'll sort of get the dog, you know, if you've shot a lot of birds over this dog, doing good field work, if I fire a shot and that dog thinks that, you know, I've shot live game and there's live game down there, sometimes that can really get the dog back in the game. Even if the dog's been through force fetch and is just saying like, you know, I'm not really sure, this isn't that exciting to me. Or you see the dog just sort of, you know, going down the drag really slowly and not really, you're like, yeah, he's kind of losing interest in this. You know, there's certain things that you can do to try and get that enthusiasm back on the drag.
The other thing that we have incorporated, especially not so much with, I haven't really had to do it with my poodle pointer so much, but he's had to do it a couple with both the setters he's trained as, and again, there's multiple ways to skin a cat. This may not be for everyone. And some trainers would say, don't do this. But for us, like during our force fetch segments, if you see the dog is just starting to like, you know, if you're just trying to keep the dog's mental, you know, if you're just trying to keep their enthusiasm up, sometimes we'll just take a break and we'll just say, you want a fun one. And that's a cue. Like we always use that phrase for, this is a fun retrieve. I'm just gonna like, you know, tease them with it, toss it, let them just go grab it and bring it back. Andy's done that a lot with his setters, like in between force fetch periods that are kind of stressful. It just helps them to like just bounce back a little bit. And so when he's had issues at the drag with a couple of them, he'll incorporate a fun one with the dead duck. Like he'll either do it at the end of the drag, or, you know, you start at the beginning, like just, you know, get them jacked up, like kind of like you would a puppy, and throw it like, you want a fun one? And then they know that fun one is the cue for, oh, I get to just relax and just go grab it and, you know, whatever. Some dogs don't need that, like mine would get sloppy if I did fun ones, so I don't do that. They haven't really lost their enthusiasm, but if they do, then that's what I would do. So that might be something like just to get her jacked up on ducks again. Just,
Yep.
and again, some trainers would say, no, I don't do fun ones or whatever, while I'm, but there's many ways to skin a cat, so.
Yeah, that's a good point. We do that quite a bit in our process. And even, again, it's about keeping that enthusiasm up and having the task being, joyful to the dog. So like Amanda said, we will incorporate, particularly if the dog has, completed the drag, I might complete my retrieve, nice presentation. And then immediately I'd give my dogs a real nice fun one, just toss that duck, 15, 20 yards. I still would want it to complete that retrieve, but the Alicia even alluded to it in the chat, always ends, with a fun bumper. That can really break up the tension in the force fetch process. I alluded to, like, when you were a kid and your teacher was like, okay, it's time to go to recess. We're going to take a break for a little bit. That can really kind of, recuperate your dog. So, I'm speaking from personal experience. When I first trained my first dog through NAVHDA, I was much more regimented back then than I am now. Regimented in a way where, there's a lot of folks that they said, okay, this is a hunting dog. I expect it to do what it does because I told it to do that. But that really doesn't work for a lot of dogs. You have to find that balance where, you're still providing that guidance and expecting the dog to do tasks, but you also need it to be a fun process for the dog. And that keeps, in the force fetch process, not all the time, like it's a joy to see a dog that's force fetched that is retrieving birds. Its head is high. Some trainers refer to it as a dog that looks real cocky when they're retrieving. Head high, tail is cracking, tail's wagging. That's a dog that's like a happy retrieving dog. And you can get a dog to do that still by going through that force fetch process if you incorporate some of that positive feedback in your force fetch program as well. So I think there was a question from Matt.
Matt asked, can points be made up on healing on the drag portion of the test if there were issues on the actual healing session?
Yep. So I think Susan answered it as a no, and that is correct. I may have, I said earlier that we train healing by, when we're training, not testing, by healing the dog up to the drag. We do that often. The only portion of the utility test where you are judged, your actual judgment of healing, is when you are walking to the blind through the heel stakes, coming down to the blind to start the remain by blind section. That's the only point in the entire test where you're actually judged on your healing. Your healing is, walking at heel is the second line down there in the scorecard. So there's no actual judgment of healing in the field. They don't have to heal coming up to the line to do your field. They don't have to heal coming up to the drag. They don't have to heal coming to the duck search. They don't have to. It kind of depends on the dog. If you feel that you have a dog that needs that and needs to be healed to each portion of the test, then we probably will do that. But your only healing score is actually judged when you are walking through those healing stakes, coming down to the remain by blind. Yep, Matt, that's what I thought. I think Braden's got his hand up again too.
Yep.
So this was just kind of a question on the topic of healing that I had is, so, which I know a lot of people are familiar with, you can be super solid on something and on test day, you could show up with a dog with a completely different personality.
Yep.
So say you begin the healing portion through the stakes. In the beginning of it, say if, the wheels are fixing to fall off the wagon per se, is there a specific method of potentially trying to save that? Like, could you make your, would you suggest hoping for the best on just continuing through? Or as a handler, take I guess maybe your obedience or cooperation, Nick, reset the dog, make your correction, and then continue through?
So let's talk a little bit to answer that question, Braden. Let's talk a little bit how healing is judged. And that might be, I can talk about that a little bit, and then, how you might address, your specific question. So trying to look to see, I'm looking through the Ames book right now on, walking at heel. So walking at heels on page 22 of the Ames book. There's going to be in the heel course, it's set up what's called the serpentine style. So there's going to be maybe multiple bends, slight bends in the course. A minimum of 10 pairs of stakes. You guys have probably seen chapters will use wooden poles as stakes, or sometimes they'll use a tree, could be the barrier, a stake on opposite of it. A lot of chapters use those white stakes that have a little metal rod on the ground, on the end of it, that you can just push right into the ground. You can buy those at like Tractor Supply or Home Depot. The nice thing about those is they are actually 36 inches wide. It's 36 inches long, which is technically how wide the healing course should be, at least. So if you went end to end, you can set up a healing course real quick. You take those white posts, stick one in the ground, go perpendicular, cross the other to the other one, and there's your reference pointer where the other one should be. Generally speaking, that's about how healing course is set up. 50 yards long. The dog is allowed to heel off lead or on lead. That's your choice as a handler. If it is on lead, though, the best scores are going to be to the dogs that as they go through the healing course, the leash is loose, meaning that the dog hasn't pulled in front of you and that leash gets tight. Once that leash gets tight, that's considered a correction. So what the judges will instruct you to do is, they're going to give you your gun, because you're walking down the blind. You're going to be expected to walk at heel with you carrying the gun. They're going to give you 4 blank shells. They're going to give you your directions for the remain by blind, possibly the steadiness by blind, unless you want those directions broken up. There's 2 different segments there. Sometimes new handlers will say, sure, just give me the directions for the healing and the remain by blind first. And then when you get down to the blind, we can give you your directions for the steadiness by blind as well. It's really up to you. A good judge will say, hey, do you want all the directions at once or not? What they're going to tell you for healing is the healing starts as soon as you give the first command. It used to be a number of years ago that the healing would only start when you went through the first set of gates. That's not the case anymore. It's changed a number of years ago. And why the reason for that was we used to see a lot of handlers that would like spin around their dog. They would yank and pull before, they would basically be prepping their dog or training their dog right before they went through the healing course. So we put a stop to that. We kind of changed the standards a little bit. And I think it's really improved some of that stuff that we used to see. So for example, the first command could be, you just say the word heel. If you said your dog's name and the word heel, we're going to start judging your healing right then and there. You're usually about right in front of the first stake at that point. You've come up to the line, say the word heel, you're going to start walking. First command could also be a combination of a leash pop and you saying heel at the same time. It's very common for handlers to do that as well too. Anything after that, like if the dog goes around a gate or a missed gate, if the dog gets, a half to 1 body length ahead of you or even more, that's going to drop your healing score. If that leash gets tight, again, the dog's getting out in front of you, that's going to affect your healing score. I saw a couple dogs this year. There are even a couple dogs at the Invitational that described kind of what you were talking about, Braden, where the wheels are coming off and the handler actually, just to get to the blind, knew the dog wasn't going to heal, had to actually hold on to the collar, and the dog, walked on its hind legs only all the way to the blind. And of course, Invitational or Utility, that's probably going to be a 0 in healing because there's no real control on that dog. So that's what we look for in healing. Again, after your first command, we start judging the healing all the way down. You're judging healing all the way down till you get to the blind. So you go through the last gate and bring your dog right up to the blind and set them up for the remain by blind portion. So to answer your question, Braden, it's sort of that the answer can be given, the same answer I would give you would be the same answer I would give you in the field per se. If your dog just was coming unraveled in steadiness, as judges, we're gonna try and say to you, if you need to give a command and you feel something's going really bad here, then give the command. Because sometimes when you do that, the dog will step into line and everything else will be fine after that. Obviously, the least commands you give, those are the dogs that are going to receive the higher scores. But, I've seen some handlers, they just don't understand, walking through the healing course. I've seen some handlers just way overcorrect their dogs that didn't need to, come up and stop in the middle of the course when the dog was in a perfect heel and then say heel to him or pull him one way or other. And that's not necessary. That's unfortunate, but we do see that from time to time. I've seen handlers that actually use the gun and put the gun in front of the dog. That will get noticed as well, because that's basically like a barrier for your dog. I would advise you not to do that. Don't train like that, because you're probably not going to do that hunting anyway, right? If you're in a hunting scenario, and you're actually walking up to a blind expecting to jump shoot ducks, you're going to have that gun loaded and ready to go. You're not going to be using it as a training tool in front of your dog. That would be really unsafe. But I have seen handlers do that.
I guess to give you rather than a theoretical situation, say I'm walking my dog, I'm halfway down and she starts, going a full body length in front of me. Rather than saying anything or whatever, if I were to just kind of make a stomp my foot kind of dramatic stop and let the dog, like if the dog noticed that and reset, obviously I would take that as that would be considered giving a command. But if I were to do that and then continued on the rest of the way smoothly, how much would that potentially just hammer you on your healing score?
Well,
Can I interject something here?
sure. Yeah.
If you're gonna do that and stop and stomp your foot, I guess my question is, why not just give a good solid heel command, unless your dog isn't going to obey the heel command but will react better to a stop and a stomp? Like, why not?
Well,
just
I
give a
meant
heel command?
not like a little kid throwing a temper
Well,
tantrum,
no,
but
I
like
know, but
on
you're
your
gonna miss
last
the point
step,
either way,
kind of make
probably.
on your last step before stopping, kind of being
Ah,
a little overly dramatic on your,
Scuffle.
yeah, and the dog noticing that, making the correction, coming back to you, and then healing the rest of the way. Would that potentially be a 2?
Well, the first thing to remember that you described to me was, at this point, the dog is already one body length ahead of you, right? So a dog that's already, and you haven't given any commands to correct that yet, a dog that's already one body length ahead of you, the judges are probably looking at that as a negative in your healing, right? So in those situations, this is probably handler 101 or some things to think about as you're training. If I have a dog that is going to get out ahead of me a little bit, I might try and match the speed of that dog a little bit better if I'm actually going through the healing course on a utility test day. Okay. Now the judges are going to notice that probably, if you're running down to the blind, I mean, that's not what I'm talking about here. But, if your dog's getting a little bit ahead of you, a little bit antsy, sometimes I might just pick up my pace just barely and match the pace of that dog. But if you have a dog that is let's say what you're describing, Brady, is your dog is one length ahead of you, and it's going to get worse. Like you have a feeling that it's going to get worse. If it gets worse, then that's going to impact your score. But if you can correct it, that might at least stop and keep you on the score that you're at. You know what I mean? But again, a dog that is a length ahead, that's going to be impacting your score. And if you give it a correction, that's also going to be impacting your score. Right. So if you think the wheels are really, really falling off, just like in the field and steadiness, as judges, we try and give handlers advice to say, look, when a judge says to you in the field, if you think you need to give a command here, go ahead. He's really saying to you, he or she's really saying to you, you should probably give a command here so you can kind of salvage this. That's what they're really suggesting. Now, obviously, the judge is not going to interfere and provide you that feedback in the middle of your healing run. You know, nobody talks to you, you know, as soon as you start your healing portion. But it all kind of comes down to never allowing that dog to get out in front of you, right? From a training perspective. But I understand what you're saying, that, you know, we see dogs that just heal beautifully. Then on the day of the test, they just decide, you know, I'm a different dog today. I will tell you that in our training methods for training healing through the healing stakes and training the blind and the steadiness sequence, we have dogs in our chapter and dogs that just really, really want to go down to the water really fast. And ducks are just the love of their life. And they know that they're going to go through that healing course and then get an opportunity to retrieve a duck. Sometimes the situations is created by the handler, right? And I know people that they start training for remain by blind, and every time that they're doing healing, the only time they're doing healing is when they're healing the dog through the healing stakes and right to the blind, and then they do the retrieve, and then they heal out. So the only thing that dog knows in life is when I go through these healing stakes, I'm going to get a retrieve. And those are usually the dogs that actually, because of the way the person's trained, they get overzealous and over anxious to get to the water. And they just want to get to the water so they can have a duck thrown for them and retrieved. So oftentimes we will incorporate, we just heal the dog down. Again, we've done a lot of healing work before we even do this, right? We heal the dogs in the field. You know, I will tell you, I use every bit of opportunity when I'm training in the field. If a dog has retrieved a bird to me, I expect my dogs, same thing with Amanda, bring it to our left-hand side. I take the bird, the dog remains at heel, doesn't jump up, doesn't bounce up after that bird that I'm trying to put in my bag, because that all those little tiny things affect how your dog mentally is for the day. So the dog is going to sit there and wait, and I actually heal my dog off. Same thing with Amanda. We might heal our dogs off 10, 12 paces in the field until
or maybe just like 2 or 3.
Or
So
2 or
like
3.
you take your retrieve, heel, walk a few paces forward, then we stop, then I'll water it, get it settled. The other thing that we do also for healing, we use the prong collar. Some people love it, some people hate it. Some, you know, it's pretty much whatever works for you. For us, the prong collar has worked the best. We use it like anytime my dog is on a leash, like especially in the beginning, they're on the prong collar. So my dog will get to a point where she doesn't really differentiate between, it's like an e-collar. She's not really prong collar wise because I've just always used it. And then as she's healing really well, I can just phase out of it. But I usually keep that prong collar on, and again, not unattended. You never leave it on unattended. But whenever I'm doing any healing through any stakes, that prong collar is on, and we'll practice healing up and down the stakes with the prong collar, and I'm making those corrections when I need to. And then the day of the test, the prong collar comes off, she sees the stakes and she just heals. Again, also, a lot of times where I'm just healing down to the water's edge, and then I just heal her back out. And so she doesn't always get a retrieve. She never knows when she's going to get a retrieve. So, just a couple of pointers there that may help with the healing. And, like we said, we don't, by this time, with that prong collar, after a while, you're just able to heal a dog off lead like you
Right.
would through the invitational. Like
Right.
I could heal my utility dog right now off leash, and I do. Because I've just done it so much. The only time that we don't really do healing is when we're starting duck search. That is a free for all. I need that dog to be jacked up. I don't want it to heal. I want it to jump out of the car and launch into the pond. So that's the only time where we're not really incorporating healing. We will at the end, like once we've started to get, once we're through the duck search and we've gotten consecutive 4 searches out of our dog, then we can start to reel them in a little bit and start healing them down to the duck search area. But before that, that's really the only place that we're not healing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And again, Braden, in a perfect world, you never want to allow that dog to get out ahead of you. Right. But different things happen on test days. But again, it really comes down to like, if I have a dog that's like a half a pace ahead of me going through the healing course on test day, I might just barely pick up my pace a little bit. But during a training exercise, if I have a dog that's a half a pace ahead of me, certainly I'm going to correct it with cutting the dog off with my leg or giving it a correction. Particularly a dog that is a full pace ahead of you. If it's one length ahead of you, absolutely that should impact your healing score. And any subsequent commands you have to give after that would impact your score. Now, a dog that walks one pace ahead of you the entire time and you gave it one command and that's all it did, that might be a pretty decent score. That could be a 3 if that's all it did. And if it's in control, the dog's in control, right? Just happens to be that the dog's walking a little ahead of you and is not out of control and you're able to get to the blind efficiently as a duck hunter, you still might be okay. But if you think, again, as judges, when we suggest that you do something like, hey, if you need to give a command to salvage something, then give the command. It certainly, that's where you got to decide as a handler, what's better. Is the dog going to get out of control on the healing course and you need to salvage it, or can you kind of get through it? So I think that answers the questions, Alicia, in the chat. I think I've gone through them all.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions or things that they're working through that they'd like advice on? Or because if they don't, we'll move on to the training resources that we have listed here and welcome any other suggestions for training resources. One that I don't have on here that was mentioned earlier today when I was kind of reaching out to people was the George Hickox training videos, but I just kind of listed some that we've used that we know of. Feel free to throw any others out there. Obviously the aims and rules and the green book, and then we also have the Training the Sporting Dog by Donald Smith and Urban Jones. That's one that we've used for just kind of the step-by-step of force fetch. And anymore, it's more, we went through force fetch with Mark Whalen, which was very, very helpful. If anybody ever has an opportunity to have Mark help you or go to one of his force fetch clinics. But what we found in the orange book, as we call it, the Training the Sporting Dog, it's just a good reference guide to like make sure you're getting all the steps in and not forgetting anything. And oh, hey, what order was I supposed to do that in? And we've even written notes in it and kind of, adapted it for what we do. Standing Stone Kennels on YouTube has a lot of really great videos for not just like utility type training, but all training. I reference them a lot, use them a lot when I'm looking for different methods to do things or anything like that. And then also Gun Dog It Yourself is a podcast. And he's got an entire like NAVHDA focused section of podcasts. And one thing that he did more recently was a force fetch. It was, I don't know, three or four part series, I think, where he had several different people. He had Mark Whalen, he had Kyle Huff, he had a couple other people, and just, you know, talked about force fetch. And then, like I said a few minutes ago, the George Hickox videos. But I'd be interested to, you know if anybody else has any books or videos or anything that they've used that has helped them train for the utility or the utility prep.
The one thing that I would suggest, Alicia, is some of these duplicate type of things are actually articles written in the VHD as well. There was a whole series last couple years in the VHD about this force fetch process and training as well. And if the folks on the call that are not aware, every single issue of the VHD is now available electronically on the NAVHDA website. If you just go onto the NAVHDA website and look under the VHD magazine section, there's a VHD library. And also we did a special, it was the first time we've ever done it. It was actually a 13th edition of the VHD that was focused solely on training articles that have been written in the past in the VHD. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about here was also in there. That one was only done in print. It was a special edition that you guys should all receive back this summer about training tips. So I definitely would go back and read some of those articles as well to reference. They're great. They're great written documents to have and reference, over time. So that's a couple I would mention.
Yeah, appreciate that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna keep this PowerPoint through all 4 parts and kind of add to it and evolve it as we go. So we will add that as well to the training resources list. So, and then this is also obviously being recorded. So anybody that would like a copy of the PowerPoint or would like a copy of the recording, just email us and let us know. Anything else? I think we covered everything we meant to cover, and we've done it in pretty good time. So if anybody has any questions or comments or anything, feel free to speak up.
For everybody that's on tonight, just in the future, say if you're only, if you have something come up, you're not able to make it to one of the 4 parts. I'm planning to, as we continue doing these, take the recordings, going to kind of do some slight editing to make them a little more efficient and put them together. And NAPS is currently, like Alicia said earlier, we're currently working on a Facebook page that is going to be strictly for training scenarios, a place for people to be able to post a video. Here's what I'm doing with my training. Here's my issue. Here's what I'm doing wrong. And I plan to divide all of these 4 parts into the different sections, pin those on that page so that people have, a resource to go to that, watch these and see, maybe a question you have in the future, would be answered in this video when it may not apply to what you're doing at the moment.
Great. Thanks, Brayton. Okay. Well, if nobody else has anything, I want to thank everybody for coming. Andy, thank you. For those of you that are or may be unaware, Andy is running for vice president of NAVHDA. So your bio is in this month's VHD, Andy?
Yep, that's right. The September VHD. Yep.
Yeah, go check it out, guys. And I think voting is in October.
Yeah, every NAVHDA member will get an email
Okay.
right around October 15th. That'll come directly from the NAVHDA office email address, and you'll be able to participate in the voting electronically for the first time. Usually it's always been done paper ballot where you get mailed a ballot and expect to pass it back in, but we're going to do it all electronically this time, make it a little bit easier for everybody. So it should just be a easy way for you guys to participate in the process.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, guys. And thank you, Andy and Amanda. I guess I think that's about it. So everybody enjoy your evening, and we'll talk again in a couple of months. And in the meantime, if you guys have any questions or want to reach out, and we'll throw a announcement up when we have that training page on Facebook up and running. So yeah, cool.
And if any of you have any questions on future related things or specific topics you want covered on the utility, shoot us a message on Facebook or something so that we can kind of pre-plan to put it in the agenda.
Yes. Yes. All right, great. Thanks, guys.
Thanks
Have a great
all.
night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.